This is a special day for all of us as we look back over time, as we consider what has gone before, and especially for those of us who have served. And as Canadians, we gather in houses of worship all over this great land of ours to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice for peace in their time, and those who served with them, men and women, soldiers, sailors, air personnel, merchant marines, and the families that they left behind. And we recall all those who have fallen while serving Canada on other missions in faraway places, Bosnia and Afghanistan being principal among them, war zones where I have personally served. And we remember those who continue to live with the anguish of what they endured, invisible injuries of a different sort. Now, it's pretty dangerous to give me this. There we go. Okay. All right. Now let's see what happens. There we go. Do you know her? Her name is right there. Margaret Macmillan. This is a book that she wrote a few years ago, War, How Conflict Shaped Us. And I want to just, she's a Canadian historian and internationally renowned. I want to pull a few paragraphs from this book as a way of getting into what we're going to see here this morning. She says, the West does have a long and shameful history of observing one set of rules for itself and another for those it considers less civilized. When the Geneva Conventions and the Hague Agreements, or the laws of war, were written, more than a few non-European countries were either unaware of them or had not been invited to sign on, and as such, did not receive their protection. The civilized nations, and I put civilized in quotations, who signed the series of Geneva Conventions dealing with the prisoners of war or the Hague Agreements on arms limitations before the First World War were quite clear that they applied only to themselves. So when Japan modernized and became a Pacific power, it was accepted into the circle of the civilized. I was quite taken by what one Japanese diplomat said to what was called the League of Nations in those days. And this is what he said. We show ourselves at least your equals in scientific butchery, and at once are admitted to your council tables as civilized men. I thought that was quite a powerful statement. So when we pause to think of war, we think of its costs, its waste of human life and resources, its violence, its unpredictability, and the chaos that it leaves in its wake. And it has become increasingly true in the modern age. The demands of war have grown with our capacity to make it. Now, this is a quote from the President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, and I thought this was just last month at the General Assembly at United Nations. War is a failure of humanity, he said. It is a collective failure of our fundamental values. It is a failure of us as human beings. Now, the Canadian War Museum here in town has scores of paintings on war. I'm sure you've all been there and you've seen these large, large murals. I want to take a few moments this morning with one of the more famous paintings of the 20th century about war. This is painted by Pablo Picasso, called Guernica. You've probably seen visions of that in other places. It's a very, very famous piece of art. In 1937, the Spanish Republic commissioned Picasso to create a large commission for the World's Fair in Paris, which was to be that same year. And this request came to him at during the most destructive event of the Spanish Civil War. Guernica was a small Basque village deliberately targeted by the Nazi Luftwaffe on behalf of their ally, General Francisco Franco, who was leading the rebellion against the Spanish Republic at the time. The town was totally destroyed. Hundreds had been killed or hurt, all of whom were innocent victims. Picasso was living in Paris at the time, and he was cognizant of these events because of newspapers and photographs. And he was deeply, deeply moved by the testimonies of some of the survivors of that terrible tragedy. So Guernica became his enraged cry against this absence of humanity. It went on display in 1937, as I said, at the World's Fair in Paris. And Picasso's disdain of the war was evident, and when the Nazi ambassador to France at the time, Otto Abetz, stood in front of the piece, and Picasso was there, he asked Picasso and he said, "Is it you who made this?" gesturing to the mural. And Picasso defiantly replied, "No, you did." And he walked away. This gives you some idea of the size of this mural. And here it is in Madrid at the Museo Reina Sofia, and that's where you would see it today. A painting that perfectly encapsulates the inhumanity and horror of war and stands as a timeless warning of what humankind is truly capable of doing. Now, I'm going to just unpack this quickly because an awful lot of scholarship has gone into explaining what all this means. And if you have a chance to go home today and look it up, spend some time looking at it. And I want to just pull out a few of the images and explain what is going on in this painting. And I would say that this is a tapestry of that same painting that hangs outside the Security Council of the United Nations in New York. It's been there since September the 13th, 1985. The first caption I want to look at is on the far left of the painting is you find a woman in extreme anguish while holding her dead child. And it looks like there were cries to the heavens of the injustice that was being visited upon them. And here we have a woman on the far right of the painting, captured in mid-scream, engulfed by the flames of incendiary bombs. And here at the bottom of Picasso's painting is a man who's dead and dismembered, and as you can see, holding a broken sword, symbolic of their futile efforts to defend themselves. And of course, this is the horse in the painting, disemboweled by an arrow, emblematic of the suffering of the Spanish. And you will notice, if you look at the nose of the horse and the teeth, there is a subliminal skull. Oh, let's look at this. A subliminal skull right there. If you can see that, right there, a subliminal skull. And here they are together, most of them. But I wanted to draw your attention to what is in the center there, and it's faintly drawn is a dove. And you can hardly see it, as it speaks to a fleeting peace. There's just one little bit of white on one wing, as the dove coos at the top of its lungs, crying out for peace above the din and destruction. So 1937, how's your math? How long ago is that? Well, I want to fast forward to today. And this is what we have today. Prior to that, I want to show you, this is what Guernica looked like after it was bombed out in 1937. These are some of the scenes that I'm sure Picasso saw. So here we are nearly 90 years later, and here we have what's been going on and continues to go on in Ukraine. Devastating scenes that we are witnessing all of the time. It's hard to imagine for us here living in the comfort of Canada and the peace that we enjoy. And of course, Gaza City, where there is a ceasefire, but it's quite, I'm not sure, I mean, it's holding, but it's having its difficulties as you follow the news. And here, the victims of war, internally displaced persons, IDPs. So I asked the question, how are we doing? What have we learned in nearly a century? Now, Psalm 85 says this: steadfast love and faithfulness will meet, righteousness and peace will kiss each other. This speaks of the virtues of reconciliation, something that we strive for. We strive for that in our families, in our communities. Diplomats strive for that between countries. But true reconciliation always involves a delicate balance of these virtues: peace with justice and mercy with truth. And no vision of a world that is whole can exist without all four virtues coming together to embrace in the public square. Now, I want to reflect on Psalm 85 for a moment or two. There is a rabbinic tradition, according to this psalm. It's a fable, but this is what the rabbinic tradition speaks of in relation to this. The story goes that the Holy One was about to create Adam. The ministering angels formed themselves into factions, and some of them said, "Go ahead, let the human be created." While other angels said, "This is a terrible idea." The angels speaking for love said, "Let the human be created, because the human will perform extraordinary acts of love." The angels speaking for truth responded, "No, don't create the human, because they will always lean toward falsehood." The angels speaking for justice said, "Let the human be created, because humans will delight in doing righteous deeds." But the angels speaking for peace said, "No, don't create them. They will be intoxicated by violence." So some might say, maybe the angels were right. Maybe it's too hard for us to bring mercy and truth, peace and justice within ourselves. One might ask, if we can't find these virtues within us, should we ever expect them to be found among us? As people of faith, our spiritual journey moves us like the swinging of a pendulum. It swings us first inward as God's Spirit continually creates us in Christ's likeness. It is then that we can imagine engaging one by one each of these four virtues. How does my life interact with truth? How does my life engage with mercy? Do I make room for justice? Does my life embrace peace? So when the pendulum swings back, our spiritual journey sends us in a counter movement outward to engage with the pain, the anguish, and the problems of the people of the world. Our whole lives are the repeated movement of inner work and outer work. And reconciliation begins with us as individuals, looking inward to embrace these four virtues, then responding to the brokenness of the world around us. So we are called, according to John, to be peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God, we find in Matthew. So the question resounds, can anything good come of war? Title of my message. Where is the hope in the midst of such colossal suffering? Right here we have an artwork created by my partner, Deborah Moore. And this is centered around Romeo Dallaire. It's about reconciliation. So we're all aware of Romeo Dallaire and the Rwandan genocide. Now, few have been impacted as much as Dallaire himself, a man that continues to experience the effects of that time decades ago. As a living symbol of hope, Dallaire is internationally celebrated for his efforts to prevent the recruitment of child soldiers as instruments of war. Now, Deb is a war artist, and this mixed media piece that she has created here is one in a series, and I'm going to unveil it later, and I'd ask you not to take any photographs because it hasn't been exhibited yet. She's kind enough to let me borrow it for messages like this. But this painting has 14 portraits. And when Deb saw a photograph by Peter Brigg in the Toronto Star of Romeo Dallaire with former child soldiers, she was struck by the jovial camaraderie between Dallaire and the boys. She then noticed the individual expressiveness of each face and began sketching. Now, I'm going to read what she has given me to say. And if I don't get it right, I'll probably have to rent a room from somebody here. So I'll be following my notes quite closely to do her justice. So minimizing the details of the photograph, she was looking to bring out the meaning of what she was seeing. And in studying about Dallaire's extraordinary work to end child soldiering, she came across a quote of his. "Rwanda will never leave me," Dallaire says. "It's in the pores of my body. My soul is in those hills. My spirit is with the spirits of all those people who were slaughtered and killed that I know of and the many that I didn't know." And after reading this, she knew the Rwandan hills had to be represented with Dallaire and these boys. So the photograph, there was a lot of extraneous detail in the background she excluded and created the hills of Rwanda. And Rwanda is called the land of 1,000 hills because of its rolling hillsides, valleys, lakes, which make up the majority of the country's landscape. So she decided to call this painting, or this piece of art, a land of 1,000 memories. So choosing a tonalist or a neutral palette, we see these hills depicted far off into the distance. And when you look at the artwork, you'll see what I mean. The same tones were then applied loosely to depict the faces so that the hills and sky are part of the boys as well as Dallaire. So she put a lot of thought into this piece of art. Then on top of the painted faces, she used charcoal dust, charcoal sticks, and eraser to bring out the individual portraits. Now, you want to go home and try that and see how you do. It's quite an art. No pun intended. So what I'm going to do, as I come to the close of this, I'm going to pull this apart a little bit as Deb explains more closely. Come on now, here we go. So here we see, she says, starting on the left, we see this taller boy, the taller one on the left, looking on with pleasure at these boys nearest Delaire. They all appear to be enjoying a moment of laughter. The boy to the right of Delaire has his head bent right down, as you can see, in laughter. So clearly there has been some joking going on here, Deb says. Now this boy, a little further right, is also looking on and enjoying the camaraderie, but she says, I'd like to draw your attention to the boy directly above him. This young man appears to be sort of far away, somewhat contemplative, perhaps still struggling with what he'd experienced. And on the far right, we see someone who is part of the group, but there is a gravitas about him. We can't possibly know what this young man has seen. Now over on the left, I draw your attention to another boy who stares off into the distance. Perhaps he is also living with the trauma of war, something no young person should ever have to face. So most of us are familiar with Delaire's story and his personal struggle with PTSD, which is now referred to as moral or operational stress injury. He has been a champion with his lifelong commitment to destigmatize post-traumatic stress disorder among veterans and to end their recruitment and use of children worldwide in times of war, which is a scourge on our world. So in 2007, Delaire founded the Child Soldiers Initiative, an organization that has evolved extensively, an international repository of expertise, research, and advocacy to prevent the recruitment and use of children in armed violence. And there's his organization. It's at Dalhousie University. Now to go back to the artwork for a moment, there's Delaire, engaging and laughing with the boys. He's really in his element here. And when I first saw this piece, she says, what stood out to me is simple. Look at the hands. And when you see this piece of art as a whole, take a look at this. Look at the hands. This is love. He has his arm protectively around the young boy in front of him, a fatherly way, and the boy's trusting hand rests slightly on Delaire's hand. So Deb says the hands are representative of the potential good that can come from human hands, from the gentle touch of love to the power of efforts at organizing to address what is wrong and make ours a better world. So while General Delaire will never forget what he witnessed, Deb says, I believe his generous efforts have gone a long way to help him in his recovery. Now, one last thing, she says, over to the far right, we see a boy who is more lightly sketched and not quite completed. There is a similar sketch on the far left. These two boys on the edges of the work are representative of the scores of children Delaire's initiative has helped. And also over on the left, like a watermark on the canvas, is the Latin word ubique, which is how it's pronounced in Latin. Ubiquitous, our word comes from this Latin root. This is on Delaire's Delaire's the badge of his regiment, which is the Royal Canadian Artillery, and it means everywhere. The other motto on his badge is Quo face et gloria ducunt, which means with their duty and glory lead. And so as Deb contemplated all of this and in creating this piece of art, she says, I would suggest that like the Rwandan hills, these two mottos are deep in the soul of Romeo Dallaire. A flicker of hope in what sometimes can be a very dark world. And I'll just leave you with Banksy. And so I'm going to ask Joan. Where are you, Joan? Okay. She's going to help me. I'll be there in a minute. I invite you to come and observe this.